I want to start talking about wallets and this unbundling concept that you wrote a Twitter thread on. That's how I originally stumbled upon you and your profile. So you have a hypothesis that we all won't be using MetaMask in a few years. And I really like the take because right now we see, I think a lot of times we take what we currently have as truth, and the reality is we're in this massive figuring it out phase. And I mean, MetaMask grew rapidly from, I don't know, I was just talking to a CEO at Unstoppable, Matt Gould, and he said like a year ago or maybe 18 months ago, MetaMask had 500,000 users, and now, millions and millions, like what is it, 20 million plus? So yeah, can you talk through, this hypothesis, why won't we all be using MetaMask, like how you're thinking about the concept of unbundling and how it applies to some of the crypto applications we have today?
Yeah, really good question. I think it's important to back up a little and just kind of look at the major bottlenecks that still exist in crypto, which I would say there are a lot of problems that are really important. I mean, liquidity is fractured, interoperability is really important. There's obviously some parties that don't want every transaction to be public. So privacy is a really exciting theme, but I think the two biggest bottlenecks in this space still are and really have always been scalability and usability. And I would argue that when you look back over the past year, the advances we saw in scalability have been pretty massive. I mean, you had the rise of all these alt L1s that were much faster and cheaper. Obviously, we have like a ZK EVM on the horizon, rise of L2s, roll-up infrastructure is a lot better. So I think from the scalability front, there's like a very clear path over the next few years to see faster and cheaper transactions. When you turn to usability, however, I would say a lot of the interfaces you're dealing with, they're kind of just as slightly gimmicky as they were over the past 3 years in an interesting way. And I think when you really think about where kind of the next cycle is going and sort of the new user personas that need to be brought in, if you're dealing particularly with applications that are largely consumer facing, I mean, gaming, social, community generated IP, like those people aren't really going to spend the time learning how to use a MetaMask and understanding what's going under the hood. So you essentially really need to increase improve the UX that you're dealing with in modern crypto. And another interesting thought experiment that like kind of particularly inspired the tweet was this idea that think about the long run of what the user distribution of people in crypto will look like. And in my opinion, if you're looking at it on the vertical axis, really being this idea of like volume, transactions, and then on the horizontal, call it like crypto experience or like crypto nativeness, if that's a word, I think it'll almost look bimodal, right? On the one end, you're going to have, which backing up a little, I think is just kind of how most industries look. You have like super users and then your kind of casual users. So I think you'll have like under your mass retail, it's going to be low average volume and high in numbers. So that's kind of like, one peak. And then on the other end, your super users are like degens globally. It'll be these like DeFi power users that are high average volume and low in total numbers. Yeah. So that's why I would say the infrastructure that currently exists kind of supports the latter group, but in terms of what people are actually using for, I think, one problem when I talk to a lot of people that I'm friends with in the yield farming community is like, you can't really see staking APYs on MetaMask. You don't really like have an ability to monitor health factors, your leverage positions. And on the other end, it's like a very hard onboarding experience for somebody that's new to crypto. I mean, this is highly, highly anecdotal, but like the major barrier in terms of my parents opening a wallet is like, they don't really know how, think it's going to get hacked. And I mean, rightfully, when you look at what's kind of being presented in the media over the past year, you've obviously seen these like hundreds of $1 million hacks, and a lot of them are like going to the front end of the host. So the wallet is obviously kind of the main pain point there. So like an interesting case study that I also think when you zoom in on is kind of interesting to consider is Phantom, which full disclosure, they're in our portfolio, but Phantom really prioritized this very clean, sleek UI that was, relatively simple for people that you could call crypto curious. So when you look at a marginal improvement in UX for that, you basically saw the explosion of the entire Solana ecosystem. It was people that were new to crypto, largely just trading NFTs, like multiple transactions per day, relatively low average prices. But when you think of like that outcome for a marginal increase, what happens when you like 3x that and have like automatic on-ramping, better security, and you think of the other features that most kind of like mass retail users look for. So that's why I kind of broadly think unbundling will kind of occur both across like user persona, so you can think of that as like almost your verticals in terms of who you're dealing with in crypto. And then another interesting idea that I've been playing around with more recently is when you think about it in terms of the main components of a wallet, which are like, I think you're going to see dramatic increase in security. You obviously have key storage. In addition to that, transaction signing, and then obviously actually transmitting to a node. I think you're going to almost see unbundling there too, to the point where people that are developing this next generation of wallets are basically just going to be on the front end, and then you're going to have this other slew of companies, which you're kind of seeing right now with node providers like Infura and Alchemy, that basically productize an API that's going to link in and basically have the backend just be kind of like plug and play in that sense. So I think that's kind of my grand thesis for where wallets are going.
Yeah, definitely some questions on that. But one thought first is thinking about wallets. I don't know, a lot of people look at wallets as your center point for web3, and I just find it interesting because at Unstoppable, my viewpoint right now is definitely your NFT domain is almost your go-to source day to day, because you can connect so many different wallets to it. A problem point I find with wallets right now is a lot of them you're just limited to one blockchain potentially, and so for when you connect wallet on a site, that site maybe only has information flow to my Ethereum wallet. And instead, if I was logging in with my NFT domain that has my Ethereum, Phantom, Solana wallet connected to it, now they can get some communication and access to, more of my whole digital self, my wallets across chain. So that's been a little bit of something I've been thinking through too. But
super interesting.
Yeah. So you mentioned unbundling and that we've seen in the past in Web2. Are there examples you can maybe just explain or showcase, an example in Web2 on how unbundling happened after the initial tech explosion?
Yeah, really good question. I think once again, historically, it seems to be directionally where a lot of tech heads. I would just kind of level set with the idea that I would argue the entire modern tech industry was just kind of this gradual process of disaggregation. You had computers, and then you had hardware and software, and then software turned into applications and operating systems, and then applications are now just becoming a bunch of different APIs and front ends. So I think when you kind of look how that progresses over time, I would argue that to a certain extent, you could just sort of level set with why wouldn't crypto just sort of mimic broader innovation in tech? And then I think looking in at a specific example is kind of what happened in marketplaces over the past few decades, where you obviously had Craigslist, which is this massive aggregator. I guess you could think of that as kind of the open sea of what was going on Web2, just for broader marketplaces. And then that really started to unbundle. And you saw these kind of more niche experiences that basically serve specific sectors. So you obviously ended up with your dating apps and modern Tinders, and then other marketplaces that, now you're getting this generation of ride-sharing marketplaces on demand, and then those are all kind of starting to unbundle. But I think there's an important difference there where you are really dealing with kind of specific sectors. So people definitely use multiple marketplaces. I think what's interesting to consider about wallets is I think that unbundling is going to happen more so in the perspective of user persona, in terms of how experienced with crypto they are and how much they really want to get out. Because in my opinion, it's perfectly fine to expect in the long run that some people are just going to interact with Web3 social or hold, just some NFTs that are linked to a specific collection that they're part of, or a social group, or they really want to, be able to buy the NFTs that are launched by a creator that they really care about, which that's fine. Everyone doesn't need to be interacting with Uniswap, taking leverage on Aave in the long run. But I think it's important to consider that if you're only expecting to get that much out of the ecosystem, the onboarding experience needs to be pretty seamless. And then you also are willing to compromise, security and decentralization a little bit more than other people, which in my opinion is fine. It's all about what are the individual preferences of that specific user persona.
Yeah, I find just because we're both plugged into crypto Twitter, right? And so many people on crypto Twitter are so focused on being as crypto native as possible. And I see a lot of commentary on needing to go the full decentralized route. But there's a reason Coinbase exists alongside Uniswap. Not everyone wants to be going through that whole funnel to on-ramp into crypto. And definitely that user experience is something I think, even again at Unstoppable, thinking about it too. How can you buy a domain with a credit card or crypto? You get to choose, but definitely need to be providing options to all the different personas if you really think about adoption in the long run.
You're listening to the Unstoppable podcast.
the go-to place for everyone to learn about the latest innovations in Web3, NFTs, and the decentralized web. Welcome to the metaverse.